Great. So I am Ann Ball. I'm a program director at MDF, overseeing the main downtown center. And I really just want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to do kind of broad introductions of people that are joining and ask the federal delegation staff to introduce themselves. I'll call on you just so we can make it efficient, but I really want to thank you all so much for your time and coming today. I think everybody's excited to talk to you and have a good candid conversation. As I think everybody knows, the main downtown center serves really as a statewide resource for downtown revitalization, and we serve as the National Main Street Center's statewide coordinating program for 28 programs that are formally in our program right now, implementing preservation-based economic development. So that's pretty much what we do. And you know that MDF does a lot of other things like leadership training and economic research. This is just one program that we're here today to focus on. So thank you again for all of you for coming. I will let you know that we do have Yellow on his phone traveling, and we have Rosie Van Eddestein, who is the Economic and Community Development Program Director of our whole Economic and Community Development Program. And then we have Adam Burke, who is also a Program Director, Kathy Shannon Nichols, our Communications Director, and I don't think I missed any other staff.
Robert O'Brien's also here from MDF.
Did he arrive? Robert is here. Thanks, Robert, for coming in. And Robert O'Brien. And then we have a number of advisory council members here. Just so you know, MDF has their board, but the Downtown Center program has an advisory council, 17 members made up of a number of professionals, developers, planners, architects, small business owners that support the work that we do at the Downtown Center. So we have Scott Burke from Norway. We have Haley Jaramillo from Department of Transportation. And then we have 2 Main Street directors that serve on our advisory council. Let's see, Christina Cannon and Zach Schmesser. And we have Julie Richard, Maine Arts Commission. And who else am I missing? I'm moving around. What other advisory council members did I miss? Anybody? Mac Collins, who is an architect. And I think that's it from our advisory council. And then we have our Main Street directors and our affiliate programs represented here today as well. 10 national Main Street communities that are all over the state. And we have 3 downtown affiliate organizations represented. So there should be 13 or 14 communities represented here. And then we also have Martha Bentley from DECD joining us today, and then Charlotte Mace will also probably be coming in as well. So that's who is here today. The purpose really is just kind of sharing on the ground information from the federal level as well as from the local level to hopefully help you guys in the work that you are doing, which I know is incredibly hard right now. Our delegation staff, I'm sure, like our DECD staff and all of our Main Street directors, everyone seems to be doing a lot of extra work right now to support us during this challenging and unprecedented times. And I also just want to say that I think it was important to get together today because there's so much happening at the federal level as far as relief and pending legislation that either is impacting our Main Street communities or it is has the potential to. So we thought it would really be worth having this exchange. The format is what we asked for our Main Street directors and our affiliates to give us some questions ahead of time and think about information that they wanted to share from their communities. And I kind of sifted through it, and I'm going to have them help present some information and questions to you guys. And then we will kind of have you guys answer the questions. And I know you guys are all used to working with each other, so we'll let you figure out who's going to answer or chime in. But before we get started with that, I would love for the delegation to introduce themselves, and I'll just do it by my screen, who I see. So I'm going to start with Catherine, who's in the upper right-hand corner for me.
Thanks, Anne. I'm Kathy Cloutier. I am a district representative for Congressman Jared Golden. I'm based in Androscoggin County in his Lewiston office, and for the past 3 months, I've been heading up his what we've called the Small Business Task Force, specifically dealing with all of the federal aid to this disaster. We've surveyed thousands of businesses across our district. He's done, I think, his 9th town hall on Tuesday, with an average attendance of about 1,200 to 2,000 people for each call. It was crazy. So we've gotten a lot of feedback. I look forward to hearing more feedback today and helping with any questions that I know answers for. I haven't met a couple of the other delegation members, but I know Mark well, so I'm excited to be part of this team. Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you so much, Kathy. Scott,
Great.
since we can see you now.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Scott Wilkinson. I'm here from Senator Angus King's office. A lot of the same details as Kathy. I'm a regional representative. I typically work out of our Augusta office and cover Kennebec, Lincoln, and Saginaw counties. Like she highlighted with Congressman Golden, Senator King has been adapting to this new virtual world we work in and holding teletown halls and Zoom conferences, very similar to the one we're having here today. So I'll leave it at that so we can keep things rolling.
Thank you so much. Let's see, who am I missing here? Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Woodcock. I work out of Senator Collins' Bangor office, and our Bangor office covers a 5-county area: Penobscot, Piscataquis, Washington, Hancock, and Waldo counties. So there's a lot of new faces for me. Like, I don't know, Kathy Cloutier, I've heard about you, but I've never met you. Hi. And a lot of towns that I don't normally work with. So this is nice to see some new faces and get to meet a few new people. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Let's see, who am I missing? Who has not from the delegation?
Jesse and Mark.
Mark.
Mark Winter, and I work in Senator Collins's Augusta office. I cover Somerset, Kennebec, Lincoln, and Knox counties. I provide staffing for both Senator Collins and Carol Woodcock. Kathy, I was not the one that told Carol all about you, so it wasn't me.
Yeah, I'll blame Carlene. It's good.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, obviously been very busy with the senator having been the primary author of the Paycheck Protection Program. We've been receiving a gazillion calls, and it's been an interesting time, but it's been nice because we've actually been able to help people work through the process. So that's about it.
Great, thank you, Mark. Jesse.
Great, thanks. Jesse Connolly, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's Chief of Staff, coming to you from a kitchen table in South Portland. I had been traveling back and forth to DC, but that got obviously shut down in the past month or two. So yeah, we're excited to be on the call, happy to help answer your questions and be a resource. I think the delegation works really well together on calls like this. You know, trying to get you guys answers and taking back issues to our ledge team on things you might want to have changed in upcoming bills. I'm sure we'll get into this, but the House, I think most people know, passed a bill last week called the HEROES Act to sort of put forth the next round of sort of stimulus funds and changes to some of the programs that we've already put in place. You know, obviously has not been taken up by the Senate, but I'm sure they'll get to negotiate in a new package soon. So fingers crossed that we're going to continue to provide the needed federal funding back to all the groups here in Maine that need them. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I do have some comments later commenting on one particular component of the HEROES bill. So thanks for mentioning that, Jesse. I did want to let the delegation know just really quickly that this is a statewide representation. We have representation from our 10 main streets: Saco, Westbrook, Biddeford, Belfast, Brunswick, Bath, Skowhegan, Augusta, Gardner, and Rockland. And we have 3 of our affiliate communities: Ellsworth, Bucksport, and Norway on the call today. And we have numerous other communities, but this seemed like a great size group that would hopefully be, again, able to provide you with some good information as well. So I thought we would get started, and I'd like to introduce Christina Cannon, who's the director of Main Street Skowhegan, which is one of our nationally designated main streets, to kick us off with just a little bit of grounding and reminder of what Main Street is. Christina.
Thanks, Ann. Nice to see all of you. So Main Street, the Main Street program has been doing this work for 40 years nationally, as Ann said, and for 20 years in the state of Maine. And as you can see, this is not new work, but important ongoing work that is needed to sustain our local and state economies. Our approach is grounded in market research, inclusive community engagement, and innovation. We leverage the unique history and assets of our community for strategic revitalization. On the ground, our organizations and programs are drivers of economic development. We nurture local entrepreneurs, sustain businesses, support economic growth and job creation by providing industry research, training, technical assistance, and marketing. And recently, in response to the pandemic, many of us have mobilized and to support local businesses in new ways, including grant funding for our most hardest hit businesses, providing emergency relief funds. Our work facilitates the rehabilitation of underperforming properties and transforms vacant storefronts into active businesses. We foster a sense of place and bring our communities together for the common good to improve the quality of life for all. A couple of data points that we thought would be great to share. There are more than 1,200 Main Street programs nationally, and in Maine we have 28, as Ann mentioned, 10 of which are accredited, and we directly interact with thousands of Maine small businesses. In 2018, every dollar spent on the Main Street program leveraged more than $25. And in a recent Main Street study from Main Street America, with more than 5,800 businesses responding, 57% have reported a decline in revenues of more than 75% since the onset of the crisis. And in Maine, though we had a smaller number of businesses reporting, of course, 80% of respondents face the potential of closing permanently if business disruption continues. And of that, 33% expect to close within the next 3 months. And this data was collected over a month ago. And of course, we're already seeing these devastating impacts.
Great. Thanks, Christina. Any questions from the delegation about this approach? I think you're all familiar with the program because you hear from me now and again. Great.
Yeah, that's great. The only thing I'd ask, Ann, is if Christina, if you could send us some of that survey data after the call, that would be really helpful reference for all of us, I think.
Sure.
That's a great idea. We can send you the national survey that National Main Street Center did, and then we can send you the summary of the Maine data. It was a small sample, but it is it is similar to what was found nationally, which is a much larger sample. So yes, we can do that.
Great, that would be helpful.
Yep.
I think we might have froze. So, and we'll come back in a moment. What we'd like to do for the next portion of our agenda is allow folks from around the state to report, share some
We're all
on the ground
introducing.
information that's
Yeah.
happening for them, and then they'll have a question for the delegation and let you respond. So first, Scott from Norway, would you please come on? Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone, and to our representatives, thank you so much. I know you guys have been working really, really hard these last couple of months, and really is appreciated. You've done a lot of amazing stuff, but we still got a lot going on. So I am the co-chair of Norway Downtown, which is our affiliate program in Norway. It's an all-volunteer organization. We have no paid staff. And I am also a small business owner. I own a cafe, and I own the co-owner of a small retail store that sells yarn and wine. And so the first sort of where I'm going to go, talking about a little bit more about survey data. Bucksport did do their own survey as well of their small businesses, and I think it sort of reflects what we already have heard sort of nationwide, and it certainly reflects my sort of personal experience. They got a response from 54 of their businesses, which I assume is quite a few for Bucksport. And their findings were that 80% of the businesses do not have any online sales at the moment. 33% have seen a decrease of 75% or more in their revenue. And 50%, half the businesses said if conditions did not change in 5 months or less, they were at risk of permanent closure. And that sort of leads me to the question I had for you all. And this being said, so I was a recipient of the PPP money, both my businesses, and thank you for those of you who worked on that. They certainly saved my business. But it really seems that the PPP was designed it's a short-term fix. And the thought at the time was that things were going to return to normal fairly quickly. And that doesn't seem to be the case at all. So my question is that, what is the federal government, what are you guys working on right now that is sort of targeting longer term assistance for small businesses? And when I say small businesses, I really mean small businesses. I mean, certainly less than 50 people, but probably even smaller than that, less than 30 or less than 20. Because these are businesses that have a really hard time. We have a hard time accessing any capital whatsoever. And we can't easily finance any sort of debt. It's just our businesses don't work with debt, and they don't, and no one's giving us access to capital. So I'm just curious, maybe we'll make it through the summer, but come fall and come winter, when we would normally be going in with having had a good summer, and that's not going to happen now. What are you guys thinking about, or are you thinking about some sort of programs that might be able to target and help us?
God, I'm happy to try to answer that. Right before this call started, Senator Collins was on the Senate floor speaking, and what she was speaking about is she and Senator Rubio are introducing amendments to the PPP program. And one of the amendments is to allow for a 16-week program rather than an 8-week program for the PPP. And that will certainly help a number of businesses that have already reached the 8-week or are going to shortly reach the 8-week period. I don't know whether that would be helpful to you, but we have heard from countless numbers of businesses that is one of the major things that they have been asking us for. And there are a number of other things. I actually didn't get to listen to all of it because I got on this call. But I'm sure by the end of the day, we'd be happy to send the information to somebody, and you could maybe Adam or Ann, and you could distribute all the details of the bill. And a couple of other things that I thought were important is that it could also allow borrowers to use the PPP funds to pay for adaptive investments or any kind of modifications to allow for social distancing. They could create expanding like a drive-through, any type of plexiglass barriers, any types of things that would help. and they can use the PPP funds for those. So that is certainly one thing that is, I mean, I can't tell you for certain that it's going to go forward, but I do know that the PPP program has been very, very popular among the people in the country, as well as by the members of Congress. So I do think it will be very well received and could very well be considered as part of the next stimulus bill. So that is something
That's
that I
great.
think will be given a lot of attention. There's other things I could talk about, but I think I should give somebody else an opportunity to mention something.
Thank you, Carol. That's great new
Sure.
news that I had not heard. Would any of the other delegation like to add to what Carol said in response to Scott's question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up, and similar to Carol's highlighting of a couple of bills, Senator King's also involved in that same exact area of trying to stretch the 8-week period in PPP. He has a bill that extends it to 24 weeks. All of us are sort of hesitant to speculate on exactly what the agreement might be in the end, so we really can't tell you that, and all of us will be straightforward and honest about that. I know that in the House bill that passed, there was also an extension, which maybe the House members will talk about. One other thing that Senator King has been focused on in terms of sort of working capital for smaller businesses and trying to create more flexibility in the PPP rule is this 75-25 rule, where only you have to use 75% of the eligible loan for payroll expenses for it to be forgiven, and 25% for things like mortgage interest and rent and utilities. Senator King has put forth both a request to the Senate leadership and actually just put out a bill that was introduced today, trying to remove that rule to give more flexibility to a lot of the very small businesses like the ones we have across Maine. So that's a couple small things to add on to.
Those are great. Thank you.
I can piggyback on Scott. The House bill did exactly do what Scott sort of indicated. It extended the PPP for covered payroll for 24 weeks, I believe, through the end of the year. Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So there's definitely, and we can send you summaries of that bill to distribute if that's helpful for folks. So I think everyone, you know, as you've heard from these three offices, we're all focused on trying to enhance the work of the PPP. It has done good work for folks. And I think we, you know, like Scott said, the 75-25 rule we hear from a ton of businesses, the House bill sort of eliminated that as well. So, you know, I think, again, the House bill did not get passed into law, but I think it's a good starting point as the two bodies work towards the next round of stimulus.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll just jump in, not to belabor the point. I
Yeah.
would say the House is also scheduled to vote next week on a 24-week extension, separate from what passed in the HEROES Act, as well as in that bill, I also believe, as Scott said, it addresses the 75-20. It also allows using some of the money for PPE and other things as well. And this will be just sort of a separate package that the House is going to do, as well as some more information about who's getting the loans. That's was I think sort of alluded to yesterday through Pelosi's office. And I would say in terms of the working capital, that's a whole nother issue. And I'm glad you brought it up, Scott, because we've heard that a ton of times. Like businesses, you know, PPP is definitely helping, and it will definitely help them get rolling. But you know, like restaurants that have had to dump all of their food, or you know, they have to go out and buy stuff, and they just don't have the money to do it. So they really need access to working capital, even if that is in the form of a loan. So that we go back to the EIDL, which is the other SBA program, and we are closely monitoring. They're not taking any more applications for that right now. We're waiting to see if they are able to satisfy all the loans they have, including the new ag loans. And if the SBA determines they need more money, certainly Congressman Golden, I know others would support additional funding for EIDL for the purpose of all of these things like working capital, whatever adjustments you need. And those are really favorable terms, even though it is a loan, different program than PPP, but together we feel like it could be the difference between, as Scott said, some of those businesses that would otherwise be be closing, all their doors altogether. So we're open to all of those options, and kind of, I think a number of things are going to start in the House and start in the Senate, and maybe we end up with what Senator Collins suggested today at 16 weeks or whatever it is. But there's definitely, I think, a real broad consensus federally for more relief, both from PPP as well as access to favorable loans for some of these businesses that just really need it.
That's great.
There's also another program that hasn't been mentioned yet. And in the CARES Act, there was $500 billion sent to the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury. And that's a program that they are just apparently getting ready to get it set up. And it's called the Main Street Lending Program. I came across this, I don't know very much about it because it's not actually out yet, but it's going to be a loan program primarily for people that did not get the PPP or the EIDL loan, but it can also be for people that did get a PPP or an EIDL loan. And there will be an interest rate on it. The interest rate will be of 3% more than the LIBOR rate. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know. And the loan amounts can be for significant amounts. So it would be for investment infrastructure projects or something like that, but it certainly could be used for any type of project that a business has in mind. And from what I read, it looks like the Federal Reserve Chairman will be talking about that in the fairly near future. So I think businesses should be looking for that.
That's great. And I think a lot of the information you guys are sharing may impact some of our questions. Like Zach, I know you had an infrastructure comment. So we'll keep, we're taking lots of notes. So Delilah, we are going to move on to Delilah Pupor, who is the director of the Heart of Biddeford, which is another nationally accredited Main Street. Delilah.
All right, thanks. And thanks so much for being on this call. I'm already learning so much. It's wonderful to get to hear from you. In Biddeford, we've had a lot of Zoom calls with the business owners over the last few months. And at the last call about 10 days ago, it became clear that the business owners, many aren't ready to open. And they found the open dates to be a little bit random, might be a word for it, just not necessarily based on the CDC and things like that. So in a way, they have these relationships with their employees, and they know their customers, and they just couldn't guarantee that their employees would have a safe experience there. So we kind of created a new campaign in Biddeford called Moving at the Speed of Safety. And there's a whole bunch of steps that the business owners wanted to work on together: coordinated purchasing, awareness campaigns for consumers, hand-holding with small businesses to help them go through the checklist so they're not sort of like winging it. And it's amazing to hear about these possible funding for things like the plexiglass and things like that. That would make a big difference. And also advocating for the testing and tracing that really seemed to have been part of the message from the beginning of this, that would make it a really sustainable opening. So it'll be more like, we'll put more safety in place, customers will feel more safe, businesses will want to invest more, there'll be more customers, and maybe we'll have more of an ongoing increase in opening of the economy versus saying it's June 1. So that's just one informational piece I wanted to share about Biddeford. And then my question, it kind of builds on a little bit of the conversation that just happened. There's a lot of pressure to get things back open, and you hear the phrase, save our way of life sometimes. And from the small business perspective, the US way of life isn't always, great for the planet. And there's like a disparate impact on marginalized communities. And even in Maine, I heard today about African Americans being harder hit by the COVID virus. So, I noticed that the skies are clearer in some places from this shutdown. And I'm wondering if any of our federal delegation has been able to use this as an opportunity to look at opportunities that are in front of us, not just to get us back to our way of life, but to also think about new ways of life that are more sustainable. for people and the planet, make things work for everyone, because that's a lot of what we end up doing in the Main Street program, is trying to figure out how to make things work for everyone.
Who would like to start with that, with thoughts about Delilah's question?
I'm happy to go, Delilah. I think that's great to hear that Biddeford's thinking smartly and collectively about how and when to reopen. I know our office is very focused on sort of understanding the green economy, climate change issues that are sort of taking place right now. A couple of things that we've sort of been focused on. We've been on a couple of letters to leadership to support recreation and reliance jobs and future recovery packages, making sure that we include green stimulus provisions and relief things. We've also sort of looked at it from the public health side of things as well, and making sure that we're creating clean energy economy jobs as we sort of look through this next phase. And we always talk about transportation, and that may or may not be part of the next package. We're also very focused on trying to clear up some of the backlogs in the national park backlog, which we've all sort of focused on. We know about the issues here in Acadia, but there's massive issues across the country. And then we're always super focused on brownfield, Superfund cleanup sites, and wastewater and sewer stuff, which we think all sort of fit into that. So I know those are not unique. I'm sure the Senate offices and Golden's office are supportive of the same things, but we see this as an opportunity to sort of push those issues as well as we're thinking about recovery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
I'll jump in from
Thank you.
Congressman Golden's office. We have right after.
And I can say, Jesse.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kathy. You're fine.
I'm just going to say quickly, we had a bio-based plant explode at the beginning of the pandemic situation in Jay. And so we've kind of had to look at a lot of different bio-based things going forward, and we're involved in hopefully a cleanup project in Lisbon Falls. People really suddenly have a much better desire to get outside and appreciate the green spaces in areas where they weren't as focused on it before. Just on a sort of a weird, and I'm sure you're all experiencing it, we've realized that we really can all work telecommute very easily and successfully, and what a difference it makes in all of our lives, whether it's from a way of life, from a climate change standpoint, which obviously it's helping, but also just we can really do this, and we're going to try to find ways to continue to improve our quality of life and less commuting, going forward, when and if it makes sense based on some of the things we've learned during this. But it has made us pretty much refocus a lot of energies on a lot of different things, and it's timely.
Can you hear me now? So I just want to chime in a little bit, and I know Senator Collins is very aware and concerned about all the things that have been mentioned so far, but she is also a big proponent of relief funding needs to be focused on relief, and let's not make this a vehicle for every project we want to move forward. She believes in the regular order of the appropriations process. You may have seen an ad kind of accusing her of not funding the pandemic funding back in 2008. That's because they were trying to add it to economic relief funding. She later, 2 weeks later, voted for that because it needed to go through the regular process. And so I think there are a lot of great ideas and a lot of great pieces of legislation, but we need to make sure that we're not just using an economic stimulus bill, a COVID relief bill as a vehicle for everything, and make sure that things do go through the appropriate appropriations process, and that they have full hearings and they get full buy-in and compromise from, both sides. So I guess that would be my only comment on that.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move on to our next question and comments, which is from Michael Hall, who's with the Augusta Downtown Alliance, another nationally accredited Main Street. Michael?
Thank you, Ann, and hello, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to answer some of our questions today. So I just wanted to say that one thing that this whole situation has demonstrated is that it's made our main streets like even more relevant than ever. Particularly in Augusta. One of the things that we did here was we partnered with Gardner Main Street to establish a grant fund for local businesses to draw on, and we were able to help about 20 different businesses. So it sort of made us at the forefront, and a lot of the businesses, particularly in Augusta, that haven't really even been involved with our organization before, have stepped up and have sort of approached us for guidance. So it's definitely made us a lot more relevant. That leads into one of my questions, which is particularly the Main Street model. We rely on every year a third of city funding. We rely on a third of funding from events, and we rely on a third of funding from raising revenue ourselves through an annual campaign. Here in Augusta, we have a modest municipal contribution, which really hasn't changed much since 2012. We were hoping for additional funds coming up this year, but due to quarantine, due to budget cuts, it's not likely to happen. And right now, we're wondering if we're even going to see what we usually see from that municipal contribution. So my question is there anything legislative-wise that's being done, particularly for cities that might be in need of fiscal help? And if so, what are your thoughts on how we would, if not, how would we basically survive, as an organization without those funds? Here at the Augusta Downtown Alliance, we're very, very much dependent, especially now that we're anticipating a lower than estimated annual campaign drive. Is there anything in the works for municipalities to help bail them out? Do you guys know of anything in the pipeline?
Yes, I can answer that, I think. I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, first, under the CARES Act, the state of Maine received $1.25 billion for the state and for communities. Right now, that money is in Augusta, and it's not clear whether it's going to be distributed out to any of the communities or not. There are a number of strings attached to it. So it just isn't clear at this point exactly what's going to happen to it. The entire delegation did write a letter to President Trump asking for or stressing the importance of having additional funds for states and municipalities. And then earlier this week, Senator Collins co-sponsored a bill with a few other senators on both sides of the aisle asking for $500 billion for money that would go to the state, to the counties, and to the municipalities. So there's a real obvious sign that there is a need for money to go directly to the communities. I think everybody in Congress understands that there's a need. It just hasn't happened yet, but I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
That's great, Carol. That's really affirming to hear that you are aware that the municipalities are struggling, which then has a ripple down effect.
Absolutely.
That's really been the top issue for Senator King in this next round of funding. He's actually called state and local government assistance being the top issue in the conversation. So it's a key topic. As Carol said, there was some funding in the initial CARES Act that went to states. One of the challenges that Senator King sees with that is that Treasury has guidance that doesn't allow those funds to go for things like budget shortfalls, which are a big challenge when there's such a sharp decrease in revenue. As you all know from the businesses you work with, I think in Maine, it's something like 85% of state revenues come from sales tax and income tax. And those are challenged as there's a slowdown in the economy. And in that first round, there was some funds that went directly to sort of municipalities, but I think the cutoff was 500,000 people. So there wasn't a single municipality or county in Maine that qualified for that. So we've also pushed to try and, make that more accessible to smaller rural communities. There's discussions about that right now. Senator King is actually on a bill that revises and gives some flexibility around how those funding that goes to states can be used. And similarly, just as Carol mentioned, the 500 billion number, I guess, is the one that's a key discussion point, because that's the number that he's written to Senate leadership about and signed on to bills about. So you're spot on that is a big concern. Sort of when we talk about state and local government, it can sound abstract, but like you're saying, especially as you get more down to the county and municipal level, you're talking about emergency services and fire and police. You're talking about medical professionals with EMTs. You're talking about economic development people. You're talking about educators. So there's people and services at the end of this. And as some of these challenges with the revenue being short, at the same time, there's a bit of an increase in demand on these services. So the candle is sort of burning a little bit from both ends. So it's on top of mind, I think, down in DC, and we'll see, how it comes out. But certainly, it's on the mind.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Scott, for all of you for being an advocate for both the scale of Maine's communities, the small nature of the communities and the municipalities, but also of the small businesses. As Scott Burke mentioned, like 80% of Maine businesses are like 20 and under employees. So thank you for putting that context out there nationally. I find when I speak to my peers nationally, Maine is really small, and it doesn't fit. Loan programs don't work for small businesses and a lot of things like that. So
just to sort of piggyback on Scott's, and Kathy jump in here as well.
Yes,
The House
Jesse.
passed bill recently did another $1 billion directly to the state of Maine, and then a little over $1 billion to all the towns and county governments that were obviously left out of the first CARES Act based on the size requirements that were put into the bill of 500,000 or over. Obviously, Maine community fits into that sort of box that was in CARES. So that was there. It also got rid of, as Scott was talking about, some of the strings that tied to the first round of funding for states that I know the governor's office is concerned with making sure they're using those correctly as they're anticipating massive budget holes both with this fiscal year and the next fiscal year.
Thank you. Our next comment and question is going to come from Zach Schmesser, who is the director of Our Town Belfast, another one of our Main Streets. Zach?
Good afternoon. So I'd like to just echo appreciation for the fast response. I think we hear from all our partners in Belfast how appreciative we are of the federal response. And obviously, with quick response, not everything can be worked out. And so appreciate the willingness to work through those. I think Belfast is one of the Main Street success stories in terms of the revitalization that's happened. And just prior to the coronavirus happening, we had a number of downtown mixed-use projects, the first buildings being built in our downtown in over 30 years. The coronavirus hit, and either capital dried up or banks were unwilling to lend. So these projects are on hold. And these projects would have provided critical tax revenue for our local municipalities to piggyback on what some of my other colleagues have said about funding for our programs. And so I guess, we've talked about some of the programs that are forthcoming, but I would just, I guess, put a plug in for any future funding to support banks, or to support banks to support these small micro developments that are so critical to addressing issues that the state of Maine is already seeing in terms of housing and our aging population. So I just want to put a plug in for that. I guess I don't really have a question. My question was answered earlier about the PPP and the EIDL programs, but really just appreciation for all that the federal delegation is doing.
And
Thank you.
I actually have a question.
Go for it, Mark.
And I'm a little, I'll be the first to admit, I'm a little ignorant on this, but can you explain the difference and or the relationship between the downtown associations and the chambers of commerce?
Yeah.
Sure. Zach, you want to handle that since you're on?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to. Chambers of commerce traditionally serve a tourism function, so they're working around destination development, at least here in Maine, around destination development, and are focused primarily on business support. Main Street programs are based around not just business, but also the development that happens in our downtown to really encourage our downtowns, which are much smaller geographic regions than a chamber would typically serve, to really be a vibrant place for people to live, work, and visit. So if you boil it down really simply, the chamber is really just focused on business, and we're looking at kind of the whole, all the way around the globe in terms of the environment and the downtown and how it can be a place to live and work.
I appreciate that, because a lot of the comments and questions that I'm hearing are about questions and comments to support small businesses. And, we get a lot of those same questions from the chambers. So I'm trying to understand, is there an overlap? How much do you work with the chambers?
I want to add one thing and then I'll let Delilah respond. The other thing, Mark, is chambers of commerce are typically membership based. They serve their members. The Main Streets, 90% of them are not membership based nationally, and they serve the entire community. And they serve all, businesses that are in their downtowns, and again, creating a sense of place for the visitors. So it is a different model. Delilah, did you want to add to this?
Just one piece is we talk a lot about being a three-legged stool that we respond to and have stakeholders that are the business community, the municipality, and the residents. And there are times where actually the business needs might not be what a Main Street community promotes. We might be arguing for, making a place or space for employee rights or something like that. Or a business might want to be using a corner for expanding their business, but the residents of the area are more interested in using it for a park. So we'd be conveners of that conversation and not necessarily advocating. We wouldn't have the role necessarily to advocate on behalf of the businesses.
And I believe chambers are most often 501c6, is that correct? And our downtown organizations are 501c3s, except for some of our affiliates are committees of the municipality.
I just wanted to add something to the discussion a little bit, because Zach, you were talking a little bit about funding too. And under the CARES Act, an additional $10.5 billion was added to the CDBG program. It is limited to response for helping to handle the COVID-19 and also public health needs. But I do think it's something to keep in mind, because I'm sure there could be opportunities in communities. I mean, I don't know exactly how much of this is going to go to Maine. I mean, it hasn't been determined yet. But there is additional funding, and there may be opportunities for some of the communities in Maine to take advantage of that additional CDBG money. It's always nice to have some more opportunities with CDBG funds.
And Carol, you should know that our office actually is funded largely through CDBG money. The Maine Downtown Center program is. And a lot of the additional funding that is coming to CDBG in Maine at this point, so far at this point, has been earmarked, I believe, and Martha, you may know this, for food and food insecurity and food relief
Okay.
as its priority. But we have also heard from our sources that there may be other funds traveling through CDBG that we might be able to link with our Main Street programs.
Okay, thanks for
Yeah.
letting me know that.
I was going to say, I know that the money that's being managed through DCD, that, you know, they're working through sort of what are the process piece, but two large chunks are food insecurity and housing stability. You know, I think those are going to be two major focuses for that money.
Okay.
Great. So one other thing on the chamber, and then Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you. The chambers and the Main Streets, Mark, work well together. They work differently together in every community. So there are certainly relationships, like I said, all over the state for how they work together. Separate missions, but work together in various ways. So Adam, I'm going to turn
great.
it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks everybody for sharing, and thank you to the delegation for your responses thus far. I wanted to provide an opportunity much that Mark provided a segue for, which is I know you on the delegation staff listen a lot and you try to get good information back to folks. So I just wanted to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. Is there anything you want to know from the folks on this call that either helps you as you're trying to figure things out, or is there anything you want to make sure folks on this call know? So we'll just provide about 10 minutes for that kind of conversation. Just open it up to the delegation.
I'll happily jump in because it's
Great, thanks, Kathy.
what we do all day in terms of for small businesses. And Congressman Golden's going to do a survey, I think, next week in conjunction with the votes that will be taking place on the House side. What what are you, in addition to obviously more PPP, more weeks to use what you've already got, do people want additional PPP? Is there any one or two things that all of your members are telling you uniformly that would be the most beneficial at this point? It's kind of a broad question, but what else in your mind can the federal government be doing to help, you know, these very small businesses, even seasonal businesses, whatever is part of your downtown, things that are left behind? I know it's a broad question, but if there's something that we're missing, what is it?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question, Kathy. Julie?
Yeah,
You'd like to
Julie.
respond first?
Yeah, I'm from the Maine Arts Commission, and we support artists as well as arts organizations that are small businesses and entrepreneurs. One of the big things that we've been hearing from the creative sector, and specifically creative workers who collect a lot of their income on W-2s in combination with 1099s. I know a lot of you are aware of this, but it's definitely an issue, and they're getting caught in the cracks, and they're really suffering. So I've talked to Congresswoman Pingree's office and Evan Johnston in particular about that, but I haven't spoken to the rest of you about it. But if anything could get fixed, and I know it's an issue across the country when I talk to colleagues across the country as well. So I'm sure that artists and creative workers aren't the only people who are falling in that crack. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in our state who make their money from a lot of different ways. And so I just wanted to make you aware of that specific issue.
Thanks, Julie.
What do you have in mind? I mean, they are eligible for unemployment. They were also eligible for the PPP and EIDL. So what are you suggesting in particular?
They're eligible for it, but there's actually a glitch in the law that doesn't allow them to collect the PUA money. So it's something in the system, and this is nationally, not just here in Maine, that if they collect money from W-2s and 1099s, evidently they can't both be put in the system, and so sometimes they're getting bumped out completely and not eligible because they don't make enough money one way or another. So it has to be able to be fixed so that the W-2s and the 1099s can both be counted in the system so that they can collect a full array of what their unemployment would be.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. We've heard from both artists. We've also heard from fishermen who sometimes have a W-2 and a 1099. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you have any sort of W-2, that's going to be your first sort of point of unemployment status. And as you accurately said, it boxes anybody out of the pandemic $600 a week additional. So it's something we're hearing from consistently for folks that have struggles. And I know we're fully supportive of a fix. As you said, it's not just Maine, it's across the country.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Is that helpful to you, Carol? Do you need further information?
It is. I had not heard that that was a problem. I mean, I know that we've worked with some folks and apparently we've straightened it out, but maybe not that. I don't know. Mark, have you heard that problem?
No, I know that there are some folks who just the way that they have organized their business and organized the way that they get paid, that they were not, for the past number of years, were not showing any income. So now it's hard for them to claim that they do have an income that has been lost, even though in reality that is what happened. But because of the way that taxes and stuff have been filed in the past, it's tough to switch it around now to try to collect those benefits. So we're hearing that with some of the fishermen, depending on how they've set their business up. We've also heard that a lot from folks along the coast who kind of make their money from rentals. They either own cottages or they do sort of an Airbnb, but it's not an Airbnb because their income is basically rent when they rent out their house or their spare house or their cottage or whatever. And that is not included as income that has been lost because according to the IRS, I guess it's passive income.
Mm-hmm.
So those folks are kind of stuck, but and I know we're looking at ways to try to assist them, but a lot of that has to do with the way that they have been collecting income in the past to try to, take advantage of certain regulations. And now that's not working out for the future, the current programs.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I think Anne has one thing to say.
Yeah,
I'll invite somebody else to respond to Kathy's question.
Thanks. Kathy, one thing that I am particularly concerned about in these downtowns, in addition to municipal support, which we've covered, is the ability for specifically infrastructure projects related to the downtown buildings. A number of the downtown buildings are owned by nonprofits, theaters, and then we have libraries that are sometimes owned by friends groups or municipalities. These are historic buildings. They are critical places for these downtowns, and they all are raising money all the time to keep these buildings stabilized and places where you can live and work and get internet access, as in downtown libraries. So what's happening with this, obviously, is that the ability to fundraise is going to be very difficult. As Zach mentioned, the ability for a bank to be comfortable loaning to private developers. So I'm really concerned about the downtown historic infrastructure, and therefore that historic preservation fund that you guys helped, write letters of support for us was so critical, getting bricks and mortar money to Maine, and it's going to have great impact. But oh my gosh, I'm completely concerned about what's next, because I feel like a lot of these projects and these significant downtown building projects are going to stall.
So
Well, I
let me
know from,
expand on that
go ahead,
one.
Kathy.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
So I know that we're working on grants right now for, I know of one for the Lewiston Library as we speak. And so would helping with the match portion of that grant help you, or just outside of grants, just some straight up federal, some other type of funding? Is that what you're interested in?
I think it's a combination of straight up federal funding. I know the Paul Brune Fund at the National Park Service is going to have another round, possibly, I've heard, with additional funds. That's the fund Maine received our $750,000 from. Yes, helping nonprofits with match, but it's a combination, absolutely, match and direct funding.
Okay, thank you.
I know one of the things that was that Senator Collins worked really hard to make sure that was included in the 2017 tax bill was the historic tax credit. And she made sure that that was included in there. So, and I know like Johnson Hall and Gardner and some of the others, and I've talked to banks, you know, that has been huge to be able to have that historic tax credit, especially here in the Northeast, where we have so many older buildings and historic buildings. And so I know that I think it can be used as part of the match, and the banks are use that as also as part of when they're looking at the total assets of the project.
Thanks. Zach, do you want to contribute something back to Kathy's question?
I guess I was just gonna make a comment to Mark. I mean, one of the projects that I was talking about could have potentially used historic tax credits, but they just don't have the historic tax credits are great, but they don't have the capital isn't available now from a bank or from their own sources as a result of the volatility of the market or anything else. So I think where those are fantastic, and I think where those would be available, the other tools necessary to leverage that aren't. So.
Oh, thanks. Delilah?
Thanks. I think funding for reconfiguring spaces and PPP and also shifting business models would be great, you know, for the new economy. But I just wanted to say that so many of our businesses are in person, and consumer confidence will need to return before consumers return. So keeping the eye on the ball, is that the phrase, of testing, tracing, vaccines will actually help small businesses.
Great. Thanks. Scott?
Could I just ask, just adding on to that thought, I mean, one of the things that, you know, we're seeing at the state sort of more and more is the importance of sort of that social contract of, you know, staying home if you're sick, 14-day quarantine, please wear a mask, you know, all of those pieces. And so if there was an opportunity for the delegation, you know, sort of leadership there around that social contract that we have with each other, because that is so critical to the consumer confidence. You know, we hear every day of people who are now afraid to go into their own grocery store in rural areas because, you know, they're no longer sort of following the rules. So having some of the delegation sort of speaking in a proactive way on that, I think would be really helpful to some of those small businesses as well.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah,
Scott.
hugely important on testing is the idea that it goes hand in hand with all of this economic recovery, because if there's not confidence, it doesn't matter what type of executive order or anything like that there will still be people who will be cautious. So it's hugely important both to public health and to bring about economic activity. The whole reason we're isolating is because we don't really know who might have this disease, who might be sick. We want to curb the spread, even if, you know, I might get it and be asymptomatic and it's no sweat for me. It's really about the community and the other people that you might be passing it to. So the testing and contact tracing that we've seen in some other countries be successful is so key. And that's one of the top things that Senator King has sort of continued to pound his fist on the table about, because as great as the governor and the state of Maine have done with tripling capacity through a partnership with IDEX just in the last week, it's tough for a governor to build an international supply chain for testing kits and swabs and PPE and that sort of thing. So Senator King has really pushed that at the federal level. The other thing, I want to just sort of do a rapid fire of disparate topics that we didn't get to that I want to make sure to share.
I'll let you do that, Scott. And I just want to name Scott Burke's been trying to get in, and I got you both called in at the same time. So I just want to make sure we'll get over to Scott, and then we'll wrap. But Scott Wilkinson, is it okay, Scott Burke, if Scott Wilkinson just finish up, and then we'll bring it back over to you, Scott Burke?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
thanks.
Be a minute. Sorry, the double Scott. I feel like I'm in middle school again with Scott North, who sat next to me. But yeah, so one of the other things that Senator King has done around the PPP program is trying to extend the loan term for any portion of that ends up not being forgivable. Right now, the loan period, it's a 1% loan for 2 years. If certain costs aren't eligible, he's trying to extend that to either 5 or 10 years to give more flexibility for small businesses. We've talked a lot about healthcare options. and the Affordable Care Act, and Senator King's advocated for a special enrollment period. Normally, if someone loses their job and their insurance, they're automatically eligible for a special enrollment period, which is still true right now. But of course, we know there's also people who are uninsured or underinsured. So he's advocated to try and open that up for a broader group of people. We're hearing a lot from employers who are continuing to pay healthcare costs for people they've laid off, which is great, but not a sustainable solution, and not a solution that all small businesses can extend. Another thing I want to flag for you is just this week, the SBA put out their loan forgiveness application, which has guidance about eligible costs. It's the form that businesses are going to use. Businesses that received the PPP funds are going to file with SBA to have the forgivable portions calculated. So that is new and out this week. And I want to share, to make sure that you all know, to recommend to businesses to connect with the small business development centers around the state who work directly with small businesses, both on these SBA, EIDL, and PPP programs and the ins and outs, but also on business plans, working capital, projections for how their business can respond to the phased reopening that might be ahead. And they're really a great resource. And the last thing I want to say, to just sort of show the mindset that Senator King has approached with, is sort of one of conditions-based decision making. So as we know, when some of these past 8 or 10 weeks ago, we were in a very different world. It would have been hard to project and predict what it would look like today. So sort of that constant reevaluation, I think, is a theme. No one wants to pretend like everything that's happened so far is perfect and fills all the gaps, but part of the role of public service is trying to identify those issues and fill those gaps and move forward. So it's really, you guys are thanking us for being here, but I want to make sure to thank you all as well for the input. And these questions help inform some of the key concerns that you're hearing about. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Scott Wilkinson and Scott Burr.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of end. Sorry, I have an incident going off. Hold on. Sorry, a fire call, but I will. So it's circling back to Kathy's question in terms of, as a small business owner, what I might need. Unfortunately, as a small business, it's really difficult to know. We aren't lucky enough to have finance departments that can sort of do cash flow projections that will say, if we hit this target, A is going to happen. If we don't, then B is going to happen, or C is going to happen. I mean, to some extent, small businesses we're winging it week in, week out. And so flexibility is key in all these programs as much as possible. And you can sort of, I think, maybe liken it a little bit to sort of farm subsidies, in that a farmer does everything right and still might end up with a really bad crop because of nothing that they've done, because of the weather, because there was a storm, because there was, and the farm subsidies seem to work pretty well and have been around for a long time. And so, I mean, it's really what we're facing right now, is this storm in the future that we don't really know if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how bad it's going to be. Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? And so it does seem like there's some models out there for, other aid to small farms, which are small, but really small businesses, a lot of them. So that's my sort of thoughts on.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Glad we got in. And Kathy, thanks so much for asking the question. In service of our time together, I'm going to hand it back over to Ann. She has a couple things to say, and she'll close us out. Thank you all.
Great. So three pieces of federal legislation that have come to our attention that I just want to generally bring to yours. The HEROES bill that was passed by the House last week, and I believe Senator Shelby of Alabama is working on it. There's a modest request within that for Main Street relief, and we obviously are eager to see that funding go through. including that piece of Main Street relief in it. We don't know exactly how that funding will flow because I don't think it's been defined yet, but we will do whatever is needed to assist with that, getting those funds to our local programs. Another bipartisan request is brewing at the moment with sponsors Booker, Daines, and Kilby, I think, is in the House. And that's a Relief for Main Street Act, 50 billion, right? Big, not as big as something else we referred to, but anyway, that is another one we're monitoring. And lastly, the Historic Preservation Growth and Opportunity Act, which I believe Senator Collins is a co-sponsor of. That's amazing. That is the funding that's going to increase the Paul Brune Fund at the National Park Service, which we will apply for again, as we've got the get more economic data from our current projects we have funded. I think, we would like to apply again. So those are 3 pieces of legislation that we are paying attention to, and we will be in touch with you guys if we have questions or more information, but I wanted to make you aware of those. And I really just want to make sure we end on time. I want to thank you for your time. I know it felt rushed, but I hope that it was useful information for both our main streets, our affiliates, our advisory council, DECD, and then most especially to our federal delegation staff. So I really want to thank you all. We've recorded this. We're happy to share it at a later date. And I think MDF staff has a few takeaways that we will be sending out to you. And federal staff, you mentioned a few things that you said, oh, we could share that. Please do. We will redistribute it to this network that you have a sampling of here today. But our network goes much wider. So that is it. Thank you again for your time.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.